Game number 4, we have the white pieces, and we are playing 1 e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. Just like game 2, we see what's called an Italian game. And now bishop to c5 by black. This is just as common as knight f6. I would say you see bishop c5 40% of the time, knight f6 40% of the time, maybe the other 20% other moves. But bishop c5, definitely a top move. Pawn c3. So there's no knight on f6 from black, so this pawn on e4 is safe at the moment. So you can start with c3 instead of d3, and this gives white flexibility. After knight f6, there's the option to play d4 here, or d3. So white's not really showing their hand by playing c3 early. Now we see d3. And I'm excited about this because, like I mentioned in the previous video on the Giuoco piano, I used to play this as a child. I think it's a great system, and we're going to see another nice attacking setup from white in this game. d6. So that's creating this pawn chain, getting this bishop ready to come out. Castle, bishop g4. So black again pins the knight on f3, just like we saw in game 2. And keep in mind, there's no way for this black knight on c6 to double attack the knight on f3. And currently no other piece from black can double attack the knight on f3. So white's relatively safe here with this pin. Knight b to d2, reinforces the knight, and try to remember, what is the plan with this knight? It's to play rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, pawn h3, a combination of those moves. That's the common setup in the Giuoco piano for white. Black plays queen to d7. This is an interesting move because black is sort of looking at queenside castling, but they're also keeping this option open to kingside castle. And if you look at queen and bishop, they're lined up on this h3 square. So if white plays pawn to h3, they have to at least think about, would black sacrifice here? And it's not a good move according to the computer, but it's something that a human player might be afraid of. You see queen d7, you're not necessarily in a rush to play h3. Okay, so queen d7 played, pawn to b4 by white. Also common in the Giuoco piano. You have this pawn on c3 that supports the d4 square and also the b4 square. So sometimes you see d4, sometimes you see b4, and usually if you see b4, a4 will come with it as well. Bishop b6, only safe move for the bishop. Pawn a4. And now there's a threat. White wants to play pawn to a5, trapping the bishop, and white would be winning. So black has to react to this, and the best way is to play a6. Sometimes you'll see a5 in these types of positions too, but essentially black needs to be able to retreat that bishop if a6 is played and then a5. Okay, h3 by white. So white is not afraid of the sacrifice, and black does not go for this, which is a good decision. But again, this is a nice move by white in the Giuoco piano because the bishop on g4, it's doing a great job not only pinning the knight to the queen, but he's also ready to come back if needed. Now the bishop has to choose. Does it go out to h5 where it only creates the pin, or does it go to e6 where it no longer has the pin? So we're making that bishop choose a direction. Bishop to h5 played, keeping the pin. Rook to e1. Here comes the plan. Knight f1, knight g3, and we're already seeing a small advantage for white. Black castles, and it's a good time to do it because you can't leave the king in the center forever. Knight to f1, and here it comes. Knight to g3 up next. h6 by black, so they're trying to create this escape route for the bishop. And they also might be prophylactically looking at bishop to g5 as a move, so they're not allowing that either. Knight g3. And what I love about the knight on g3 is not only does it attack the bishop on h5, but it eyes the f5 square. This is a really nice square. If you picture this bishop being not on g6, say it's off the board, this knight is a monster on f5. And with the bishop here, sometimes black is ready to take. So there's this other plan for white, and we see it on this next move. Very strong move, knight h4. Both knights eye the f5 square, so one can move there with the other knight supporting it, and the knight's attacking the bishop on g6. Black does not want to allow this because the pawn on f7 is pinned by the bishop. So we're threatening to win a free bishop right now and threatening to come to f5. So if you look at the computer eval, it's already 0.8 for white. It's a pretty big advantage. Okay, black avoids the trade, bishop h7, but now white's kind of getting everything they want in the position. Knight to f5 played, backed up by this knight, and you can see this knight on f5 is a menace. It's attacking g7, which is only defended by the king. That can sometimes lead to tactics. It's also attacking h6, which is attacked by the bishop. So you can start to see this pressure building from white, and the attack is forming. Black decides, let's eliminate one of the knights. White takes back with the knight. Now we see knight to e7. This is a nice idea because we just highlighted all the pressure coming at black's kingside. Knight e7 is a way to try to neutralize that pressure, right? Black wants to figure out, is there a way I can use queenside pieces to trade off the pressure against the kingside? And this is the perfect way to do it, I think. And now knight takes f5 is threatened, which is backed up by the queen, so it could win a pawn. This encourages white to make a mistake. The best move here for white is knight takes e7, allowing the trade of knights. White still has the bishop pair, a little bit more space. Probably d4 is coming soon. That would be a nice, simple way to play this position for white, and I think that's a great way to play this position. White decides to go more aggressive here, and I like the spirit of it because white already felt they had the kingside play, but it's a little bit shaky, and with best play, the computer frowns upon this move a bit. The downside of g4 is it opens up this kingside, and black can take the knight, which is what happens in the game. And after white takes back, just notice how this is a little bit airy for the white king. So even though white has the bishop pair, that was really unnecessary to double those f-pawns and to push this pawn up to g4. So these two pawns are now weaker than if white would have just simply taken on e7 right away. Okay, knight e8 by black. And the nice thing about this position for white is white still has a lot of extra space. This pawn on f5, these pawns on the 4th rank, and the bishop pair. The bishops are well placed. So it's a difficult position for black to find good moves. And that's part of the advantage for white, is just the fact that it's difficult for black to find good moves. So now we see queen to f3. And the queen's doing a good job here because she's not only attacking b7, very sneaky, pointing at the queen side, she's also supporting kingside play. Like the queen guards this pawn on f5, so now pawn to g5 is an idea. And after queen to f3, black plays queen to e7. Now, the downside of queen to e7 is simply that the white queen can capture this pawn on b7. But this was not on white's radar. White was all in on this kingside attack. We've already seen kind of the suspect move pawn to g4. That showed white's hand that they only want the kingside attack here. And white decided to play queen to g3. Now, this is something that it's good for us to learn from. As a chess player, you want to always evaluate imbalances in the position. Being up material, like we talked about previously, is a big imbalance advantage. If you can be up material and have more space and have the initiative, that's massive. So in this case, white should really snag that free pawn. They can always move the queen back the next move and make black prove that they have something in compensation for the pawn. Because not only will white be up the pawn, they also have the bishop pair. They also have the space advantage, well-placed rook on e1. Like the list goes on and on. White really has all of the advantages, except maybe the fact that their king is just a little bit exposed with that pawn up on g4. So here I would definitely advise go for that free pawn. It's worth it. It's going to give a big advantage. Now, if white wants to play with the kingside attack here, there's a stronger move than queen to g3, which is played in the game. Pawn to g5 is the way to go. This is a pawn sacrifice, so it's a little bit hard to play this move, but what you're doing is you're taking advantage of the fact that this pawn on h6 is an anchor. It's an anchor pawn for you to attack. g5 allows you to attack it, and that opens up the h-file. And this is a higher level idea, but essentially you don't want to allow black to prevent this g5 move from happening. So it is valuable to play that right away. But in the game, white played queen to g3, still holds an advantage. Rook to d8 by black, and now pawn to g5. So I don't think there's too big of an issue playing queen g3 first because white was still able to get g5. But in this position, there are some stronger moves for black where they could prepare for this g5 break. For example, queen back to d7 pressures this pawn, and it might not be so easy for white to play g5. Okay, rook d8, pawn g5, pawn h5 by black. Now, this is where white really needs to start to calculate all the different attacking moves. You can feel that white is winning. And that's something I want you guys to get used to when you evaluate a position. This already feels in winning territory for white. So there's slightly better, clearly better, winning. This has shifted into winning territory, even though the material is equal. White has a massive attack coming. But white has to figure out, do they play for f6 or g6? This is the big decision. In the game, g6 was played. This is a plus. Oh, I'm sorry. In the game, f6 was played. This is a plus 1.6 pawn advantage. g6 is a plus 3 advantage. This is definitely stronger. And I think the way to understand this is when you play g6, you highlight the pin pawn on f7, and this pawn on h5 is stranded out here. Right? So white's going to pick up that pawn eventually, and picture this queen landing on h7 at some point. That's checkmate. So g6 is the stronger move. f6 was played in the game, still a good move. Queen d7 by black. And that's a good idea because if g takes f, boom, discovered check, and the queen drops. So black could not capture that pawn. Queen d7 played. And here white plays pawn to g6. The computer does not love this move. The problem is black can strike in the center with pawn to d5, kicking that bishop away, and then knight takes f6. And all of a sudden there's no pin on that f7 pawn because d5 was played. So here's an example. d5 bishop moves, knight takes f6. No pin on this pawn, and black is up a pawn now, so they're actually starting to fight back in this position. All right, so let's think, what should white have done instead of g6? The best moves are all to slow play this position a little bit. Move this bishop back to prepare for d5. Maybe you play pawn to d4, put that bishop on c2, attack this way. There's no rush in the attack. Surprisingly, white can just play this slowly, build the attack, and then eventually go for a break. But that's really hard to do. Usually you want to just attack right away. But in this case, that's a blunder, and black could have taken advantage with d5. Instead, they go knight takes f6 first, probably a more natural move at the beginner level. And bishop takes f7 check, great idea. Look at this poor king. It only has h8, and that king is trapped on h8. King h8 played. Bishop g5. I love this move. So the idea here is, if we remove the knight on f6 and the pawn takes, notice how our queen is lined up with the g pawn, and that's ready to go to g7 check, forking king and rook. Also, if that knight is captured, pawn on h5 is undefended, and if our queen got here, that's already a checkmate with the knight gone. So queen f5 is played, and I think the idea here is black wants to be able to capture back on f6 with the queen. So bishop takes, queen takes back. Rook to f1. Sensible idea. I guess the plan with rook f1 is the bishop and the queen both hit f2, so white's defending it an extra time. Bishop a7. I'm not sure about this move. What's the point of moving that bishop an extra time? We have a position where the black king is very fragile. Black is getting attacked. Black needs to react to this. I think the best plan would be rook to d7 and try to sacrifice the rook for the bishop and pawn. Right? So if rook takes bishop, pawn takes back, rook takes back, you eliminated these two attackers and you traded off a rook that was on d8, not doing much. But bishop a7 played, wastes a little bit of time. Queen g2 by white. Now, I don't think white has any intention of capturing that pawn on b7. They showed they didn't want to play it earlier. But what is the plan for white? How are they going to move forward? We'll see. On to c5. Black is trying to trade off this pawn, and I think the realization from black is this whole kingside area is stuck, and it favors white. But that rook on d8 and the bishop on a7, they're ready to come into the game. So c5 is trying to open up these pieces. White decides to push past. And I think a good strategy for white to look for now is, can they play f4? If this rook on f1 gets into the game, that creates major problems for black. And there's no longer a pin on the f2 pawn. We see a5, c4. Love this move. What we did is we locked in this pawn here with the bishop on a7, and all of these pawns are blocking the bishop. It doesn't have many squares left, and it doesn't have any good diagonals pointing down to our king side. So c4, really, really strong move. b6, oh, black is just cementing the bishop in there even more. That is not a good idea. Rook f to e1, rook to b8, kind of wasting time. And now we see rook e3, and white is starting to shift the rooks to the king side. Rook d8, rook f3, and this is pretty much the nail in the coffin, hitting the queen, hitting the knight. We still have our queen lined up with the pawn coming to g7. Everything's going to fall apart in just a couple moves. Queen d7. Here, rook takes f6 and bishop takes f6, both really strong. White goes bishop takes, pawn takes, and then g7 check leads to a checkmate and one more move. So white wins this game. And what are the key takeaways? You want to have a plan for what you want to achieve, even if it's a simple plan. And that's going to put you a step ahead of your opponents who don't have a plan. So again, we saw a Giuoco piano where white knew the plan. White knew how to move the pieces, how to create the kingside attack. Black did not have a great plan right from the get-go. And then we get this plan of trapping in the bishop late in the game. And black just sort of goes along with it and shuffles the rooks around and waits for white to dictate the action. You always want to be the side dictating the action. You want to play for the initiative. The other thing to think about is when your attack doesn't immediately succeed, try to slow play it a little bit. And we saw that when black rushed with the f and g pawns. If we go back a little bit, right here, white played g6. This almost gave up the winning chances for white. If black figured out pawn to d5 and then knight takes f6, black had the small advantage. So really that was the main slip up by white, is just rushing this attack a little bit. Sometimes you want to take your foot off the gas. There was also that moment earlier in the game where white had kingside pressure, the queen on f3, and they could have snagged that pawn on b7 for free. So that's another example of maybe white needing to slow down that attack slightly and go for that pawn and then come back and try to attack later. All right, so that's game number 4. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in game number 5.